Joining me now, the Daily Telegraph's National Affairs editor, James Morrow, and Herald Sun columnist, Peta Credlin. Gents, welcome as always. Featured today, again, of Question Time. I've run the footage there, James Morrow, and that's the PM's continuing commitment to set up a Makarrata Treaty Commission. Now, I don't know what he doesn't understand about Saturday night's vote. It was a comprehensive loss. It's a trifecta. You don't get the second leg of the trifecta if you didn't get the first leg of the trifecta. He didn't get the voice. So why on earth are we going blindly down this path?
Well, I think, Peta, you highlight something that's very important here, which is that the left, not just Anthony Albanese, but an awful lot of other people who are very much on the yes side, they're engaged in something that they've always accused the right of, Trumpian election denial. They're looking at these results and they're saying, well, they don't matter. The people got it wrong. So therefore, we need to do something different here and just continue on our way because we're on the side of the angels. We're on the side of reform. We want that treaty. But as you've always said, that treaty, that national treaty, is the main game for all of the legal implications that flow from that.
I should have kept my racing analogy for Patrick Carline, the son of the great late Les Carline, a racing man and historian, as we know. But Patrick, this push last night by Jacinta Price and others to get up a royal commission into what we know is occurring, but not necessarily the scale of it in remote Aboriginal communities, that failed last night. Labor won't back an audit into the spending either. This is what Australians actually want to see. They want to see practical change, don't they?
Well, absolutely. To borrow from the Yes campaign sort of rhetoric, they talked about truth-telling. How could you better tell the truth than to have a royal commission into this very serious problem in Indigenous communities? If you want to close the gap, and I think 60% of people voted no on the weekend. I think 98% of Australians want better outcomes for Indigenous communities. You've got to get into this truth-telling. You've got to explore the problems and understand the problems, whether it's education or employment or child abuse. This is a terribly backward step that actually throws to the whole empty navel-gazing type rhetoric that the Yes campaign sort of fell into, especially in the last few weeks, whereas Jacinta Price is trying to throw forward, trying to make the future better.
Spot on, truth-telling about today, not truth-telling about 200 plus years ago. Hey, Jim Chalmers, this is interesting, James. Outside of parliamentary sittings, there's a whole lot of these international meetings that go on. I mean, the Prime Minister never misses an opportunity to head overseas. We know he's off to Washington next week. But Jim Chalmers, he missed a whole lot of, I think, really important economic meetings last week. G20 finance ministers, International Monetary Fund. Instead, he stayed home to campaign for The Voice. Now, given all the talk today from Michelle Bullock, the RBA may hike rates on Melbourne Cup Day, concern about high oil prices feeding into inflation. I reckon his time could have been better spent at the meetings as opposed to the failing Voice.
Well, absolutely. And, I was just looking before we went on air to see how Jim Chalmers did campaigning for The Voice. Well, certainly in his own seat of Rankin in Queensland, it went 65.3% no. So well done there, Treasurer. You really got him over the line in your own home electorate. But that said, we live in a time right now, Peta, where I think, as everybody, I don't tell anybody, cost of living is front of mind. Geopolitical shocks around the economy are coming, and they're going to keep on coming with the situation in the Middle East and elsewhere. The Treasurer needs to be plugged into what fellow finance ministers in the West are doing, are planning, are hearing, are anticipating, so that Australia can better absorb these shocks, manage them, and he should not have been wasting time campaigning on a Voice which, if all of the reports we've read are true, well, we know that 3-4 weeks ago at least, internally they knew the thing was not going anywhere.
Patrick, I want to go to what we're seeing it play out in Europe. We've got a terror attack in Brussels. 2 Swedish nationals who were there have been killed. We've got concern, I think it was a Chechen in relation to killing of a French teacher last week. Calls today from ASIO that we need to be alive to spontaneous attacks here in Australia. I was working for the Prime Minister when Islamic State basically exploded in the Middle East. This was a huge concern of the government then. I suspect they're similarly as concerned now.
Well, they'd have to be, wouldn't they? I mean, I can't remember a more volatile time of uncertainty in my adult life, and especially today with those dreadful scenes at the Gaza hospital. Everyone's trying to blame one another. I thought it was interesting the ASIO boss talked about, he linked words and rhetoric to violence, and I think some of the things that have been coming out of Parliament in the last couple of days from the Greens are very inflammatory, potentially very dangerous. It is a really difficult time at the moment. The next few days will sort of sort out where it might go, but we might be dealing with this for months. The English historian Niall Ferguson talked about the unpleasant 1930s air that the world is facing at the moment. Now, he knows what he's talking about, Peter.
Oh, look, I 100% agree with that. I actually have it in my notes later on for someone else I'm talking about, particularly the anti-Semitism. That absolutely feels like that to me. Hey, what's going on in Adelaide? The Lord Mayor wants the flags, or has put the flags, Indigenous flags, at half-mast, despite the fact that South Australians rejected the voice. James.
Yeah, well, again, this is part of that Trumpian election denial here. You know, they just simply cannot accept the results that they got. I find this absolutely unbelievable. I find it an offence to democracy. I think it's also an offence to the people of Adelaide and of South Australia, who overwhelmingly rejected this, not because they're bad people who are racists and don't want to see Aboriginal people succeed, just the opposite. And I think, you know, this whole stuck-in-the-past mentality that we're seeing playing out with this great tantrum with the no vote, which I predicted, this tantrum of the elites. We'll be seeing it with the misinformation bill coming up soon and other sorts of measures. But, you know, this is just the first thin edge of this wedge.
They spotted Alan Joyce today in Ireland. I'd expect he would be in Ireland given his background, but that's where he is, overseas, not fronting the Senate inquiry here in Australia. There's talk that the Senate are going to vote to drag him back here. Patrick, should he front?
I think he has to, Peter. The big surprise today in that story revealing he was in Ireland is he's been there for weeks and weeks and weeks. He needs to be back in Australia, and he needs to be explaining some of those dreadful decisions that really had tainted the legacy that was built up for so long. That he was one of the wonderful sort of figures in being Australian and doing the right thing. Now that's all been turned on its head. He certainly has to answer questions and explain how that's all come about.
James Morrow, Peta Credlin, thank you both for your time.